Okay, so let's set the scene. Imagine this. It's a dark, cold night in Boston.
We're talking early 18th century.
The year is 1722. The streets are cobbled, uneven, and the air is just thick with that smell of sea salt and wood smoke. And you see this figure, creeping through the shadows, clutching a piece of paper.
Oh, it sounds like the start of a spy movie or something.
It really does. And this figure, he's just a 16-year-old kid. He's glancing over his shoulder, clearly terrified of being caught. He creeps up to a printing shop. It's called the New England Current. And he slides this piece of paper under the door. Then he just vanishes back into the night.
So you're thinking, what is this? Vandalism? Some kind of secret code?
Exactly. But the next morning, the printer, a man named James Franklin, he finds the letter. And it's not a code at all. It's a satirical essay written by a supposed widow named Silence Dogood.
And this Silence Dogood is quite the character.
She's amazing.
She's middle-aged, she's fiercely opinionated, she absolutely hates hypocrisy, and she's just incredibly witty. She's going after the local religious leaders, she's making fun of how women are treated, and she's defending free speech.
And James Franklin, the printer, he loves it. He publishes it immediately.
And the town goes wild for it.
Completely wild. Everybody in Boston is whispering, "Who is this brilliant woman? We have to find her." And the whole time, the actual author is James's own annoying little apprentice brother, Benjamin, sleeping in the attic right above the shop.
So James has absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
He's treating Ben like a nuisance, beating him, ignoring his talent, while at the same time, he's celebrating the genius of this Silence Do-Good persona.
It's the perfect ruse. And when Benjamin finally confessed, let's just say James was not impressed with the genius of it. He was furious. But that single moment, right there in 1722, it just captures the absolute essence of the man we're talking about today. You see the wit, the rebellion against authority, that literary genius, and this uncanny ability to shape public perception.
It really does set the stage perfectly. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the life of Benjamin Franklin. And we're not just, hitting the highlights of the kite and the key.
No, not at all.
We're really looking at how a runaway apprentice became what many call the first American.
And the scope of that is just massive. I mean, we are talking about the only founding father to sign all 4 of the key documents that created the United States.
The Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance with France, the Treaty of Paris, and the U.S. Constitution. He's on all of them.
An incredible record. And to do this, we've got a huge stack of sources today. Biographies, his own letters, scientific journals, even archives from the Library of Congress and the Benjamin Franklin House.
Our mission really is to unpack the evolution of this man. We want to understand how he went from being this rebellious kid in Boston to, the sage of Philadelphia who completely charmed the courts of Europe.
And along the way, there are a few themes I think we really need to dig into. There's this constant, almost obsessive drive for self-improvement. And this fascinating intersection where science meets civic duty. For him, it wasn't enough to just know how things work. He wanted to know how that knowledge could help people.
And maybe most importantly, we have to look at his really complex moral evolution, especially when it comes to his views on slavery. It's a journey that, frankly, takes him almost his entire life to complete.
So let's go right back to the beginning. January 17th, 1706. Milk Street, Boston. Benjamin is born into let's just call it a very crowded house.
Crowded is putting it mildly. He was the 15th of 17 children.
17. I can't even begin to imagine the noise level in that house.
It must have been chaos. And, his position in the family was historically pretty precarious. He was the youngest son of the youngest son for 5 straight generations.
So what does that mean, practically?
It means that in an era where inheritance, trade secrets, all of that usually went to the firstborn, Benjamin was born with basically no safety net. His father, Josiah, was a soap and candle maker.
Now, when we hear candle maker today, it sounds kind of artisanal, You picture a little boutique shop with nice scents.
Not in the early 18th century, no. The trade was called a tallow chandler, and it involved boiling down huge vats of animal fat to make candles and soap.
So it smelled terrible.
It smelled awful. It was greasy, hot, back-breaking work, and young Benjamin absolutely detested it.
He hated it so much he actually threatened to run away and go to sea.
Which, terrified his father. Losing a son to the sea was a very real, very common fear back then. So to keep him on land, Josiah tried to find him another trade. But here's the thing about young Franklin that always just blows my mind.
His education.
His education was incredibly brief. He stopped all formal schooling at age 10.
Which is just wild when you consider the intellectual powerhouse he became. He was entirely self-taught.
He was the original autodidact. He just devoured books. If he had a penny, it didn't go to candy, it went to a book. There's this great story in records where, as a teenager, he reads a book that recommends vegetarianism. So he decides to try it.
Was this for moral reasons, do you think? Or animal welfare?
Eventually, maybe, but initially, it was pure economics.
Ah.
He figured out that meat was the most expensive part of his food allowance. So by switching to things like boiled potatoes, rice, and bread, he saved about half the money his brother gave him for food.
And he used all the savings to buy more books.
Exactly. He was literally starving himself of protein just to acquire more information. It shows you the level of dedication he already had to this idea of self-improvement.
That's hustle culture before the term even existed. But then at age 12, his father locks him into an apprenticeship with his older brother James, the printer we mentioned.
And this wasn't some happy family business arrangement. Indenture was a serious legally binding contract. You were, for all intents and purposes, owned by your master for a set number of years, usually until you were 21.
And James was a tough master.
Very. He was jealous of Benjamin's talent, he had a quick temper, and the records are clear that he beat Benjamin regularly.
The relationship really became abusive. And this, of course, leads to the first major turning point in his life. At 17, Benjamin Franklin becomes a fugitive.
He does. He breaks his indenture and runs away. In 1723, that was a serious crime. If he'd been caught, he could have been dragged back in chains and had his service extended as punishment.
He first takes a boat to New York, right? But there's no work there.
No work, so he decides to push on to Philadelphia.
And his arrival in Philadelphia is just iconic. It's one of those scenes from history that's been painted and written about for centuries. He shows up in October 1723.
And he's a mess. He's dirty from the journey. He's exhausted. His pockets are literally stuffed with spare shirts and stockings because he couldn't afford a bag. He has almost no money.
Just enough to buy what he calls 3 great puffy rolls of bread.
Right, these huge loaves of bread. And he's walking up Market Street, clutching these massive rolls under his arms, eating one as he goes. He must have looked ridiculous.
And in a scene that feels like it's straight out of a rom-com, a young woman named Deborah Reed is standing in her family's doorway and sees this disheveled kid walking by, and she just laughs at him.
And of course, she eventually becomes his wife. But that moment is so crucial because it sets the baseline. He arrives with nothing, no money, no connections, no pedigree. Everything he achieves from that point on is purely the result of his own industry and intellect. He is the prototype of the self-made man.
He doesn't stay a poor runaway for long, though. He gets a job with a printer, he impresses the governor, though that turned out to be a bit of a false start.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
And he eventually goes to London for a while to really master the trade. But by 1729, he's back in Philly, and he buys a failing newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette.
And this is where we see Franklin, the media tycoon, start to emerge. He completely transforms this paper. He didn't just print the news. He reinvented how it was presented.
What did he do?
Well, for one, he cleaned up the typography so it was easier to read. He started adding maps to help explain geography. And he introduced political cartoons.
The famous Join or Die snake cartoon. That was him, right?
That was him. It's actually considered the first political cartoon in America. He just understood visual communication in a way others didn't.
And then in 1732, he drops what I would call his killer app, Poor Richard's Almanac.
A total bestseller. It sold 10,000 copies a year. In colonial America, where books were incredibly rare, that is an astronomical number.
And he wrote it under another pseudonym, Richard Saunders.
Another persona, just like Silence Dogood. It allowed him to create a character. Poor Richard was a bit of a henpecked husband, a little cynical, but full of homespun wisdom. The almanac had all the practical stuff farmers needed, weather predictions, calendars, tide charts.
But it was the aphorisms that made it a legend. Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Fish and visitors stink in 3 days.
3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead.
These weren't just catchy phrases. They were like a code of conduct for a striving middle class. But here's the real analyst's take on this era of his life. Printing wasn't just a job for Franklin. In the 18th century, the printing press was the internet.
That is a great analogy.
If you owned the press, you controlled the flow of information. You shaped public opinion. Franklin wasn't just printing other people's words. He was curating the entire conversation of the colonies. He even built a network of printers across the colonies, almost like a franchise system.
Which gave him influence from Boston all the way down to Charleston.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that influence, combined with his almanac sales in the newspaper, it made him wealthy. So wealthy, in fact, that at age 42, he does something that seems almost crazy to modern ears. He retires.
Retires is maybe a loose term here.
It is. He stepped back from the daily grind of the business. He set up a partnership where he would still get a cut of the profits, but he didn't have to show up at the shop every day. He essentially bought his freedom to focus on what he called his philosophical studies.
Which we would just call science. But before we get to the lightning and all the inventions, we have to talk about what he did for the city itself. Because Franklin wasn't the kind of guy who just sat in his study reading. He was out on the streets trying to fix things.
And it all stems from this group he created called the Junto.
The Junto. This was his club.
Right. He formed it way back in 1727 when he was still a young tradesman. He called it a club for mutual improvement. It was a group of what he called leather apron tradesmen, meaning working class guys, who met on Friday nights to discuss morals, politics, and natural philosophy.
But Franklin didn't just want to talk about things. He wanted to solve problems.
This is what I love about him. He's the ultimate civic innovator. He looks at Philadelphia and he just sees inefficiencies everywhere, so he starts inventing institutions to solve them.
Okay, like what?
Well, he looks around and sees that there are no good books available for the average person. Books were expensive. They had to be imported from England. So he starts the Library Company of Philadelphia.
The first subscription library.
The first in America. The idea was you pay a small fee, you pool your money together, you buy a collection of books, and everyone gets to share them.
It's the original sharing economy.
Then he looks at all the wooden houses in Philadelphia and realizes that fire is this massive, constant threat. So he organizes the Union Fire Company, the first volunteer fire department in the colonies.
People getting sick and having nowhere to go.
He helps found Pennsylvania Hospital, the first public hospital. And he raises the money for it using a matching grant scheme, which he basically invented, by forcing the Pennsylvania Assembly to match all the private donations he collected.
And what about education?
He starts the Academy of Philadelphia, which eventually evolves into the University of Pennsylvania. And he wanted an education that wasn't just about learning Latin and Greek, but about teaching practical skills for the real world.
He even fixed the mail system.
Oh, the postal reforms are huge.
Yeah.
As Deputy Postmaster General for the colonies, he totally revolutionized communication. He personally toured all the colonies to inspect the post offices.
And didn't he measure the roads?
He did. He attached an odometer to his carriage wheel, a device he helped design, to measure the mail routes exactly so he could charge accurate postage based on distance.
He literally mapped it all out.
He did. And he established night delivery riders to speed things up. Before Franklin, it could take weeks for a letter to get from Boston to Philadelphia. He cut that time down drastically. And that communication network, it ended up being absolutely vital for the revolution later on.
So he's measuring the roads, building libraries, putting out fires. But somehow, in his spare time, he also finds time to become one of the most famous scientists in the world. We have to talk about electricity.
This is the part of his story that so often gets reduced to a cartoon, the kite, the key, the lightning bolt. But the reality of what he did is so much more significant.
So set the context for us. What did people even think electricity was before Franklin?
It was basically a parlor trick. It was a form of entertainment. Traveling magicians would come to town, they'd rub a big glass tube to create a static charge, and they'd make a feather float or give someone a little shock.
So it was a curiosity.
A mysterious magical fluid. Nobody had made the connection between that little spark and the terrifying power of a thunderstorm.
And then enter Franklin.
He starts doing these experiments in his house with everyday objects. Glass jars, silk, metal keys. And he starts to realize that the spark he creates in his lab acts exactly like lightning, just on a tiny, tiny scale. The color of the light, the crooked path it takes, the crackling noise.
So he proposes the famous experiment to prove it.
Well, first he proposed the sentry box experiment, which French scientists actually performed first, proving right. But then Franklin did the kite experiment himself in 1752, and he flew a kite into a storm cloud.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous.
Very. And to be clear, he wasn't waiting for lightning to actually strike the kite because that would have killed him instantly. He was just trying to draw the ambient electrical charge down the wet string to a key that was tied near his hand.
He basically captured lightning in a bottle.
He did. He proved conclusively that lightning is electricity. But he went even further. He developed the single fluid theory of electricity. And he coined the terms that we still use today: battery, conductor, positive, negative charge, discharge.
So if you're an electrician today, you're speaking Franklin's language.
You are. And being Franklin, he couldn't just leave it as a theory. He had to make it useful.
The lightning rod.
The lightning rod. It's such a simple, elegant device. Just a pointed iron rod on the roof, connected by a wire running down into the ground. But it completely changed the world. Before this, church steeples were constantly getting struck by lightning and burning down because they were the tallest points in any town.
And there was some pushback on this, wasn't there, from religious corners?
Oh, definitely. Some religious figures argued that lightning was divine wrath. If God wanted to strike a building, who were we, mere mortals, to stop him? Franklin's invention was a massive philosophical statement. It said, no, this is a natural phenomenon. It follows laws, and we can understand and control it.
It's the triumph of the Enlightenment over superstition.
Precisely. And he didn't stop there. I mean, the man was an invention machine. The Franklin stove, for more efficient heating, it produced more heat with less wood and less smoke. Bifocals? He got tired of constantly switching between his reading glasses and his distance glasses, so he just cut the lenses in half and stuck them together in one frame.
The flexible urinary catheter always gets a mention.
Yes, that one. His brother suffered terribly from kidney stones, which was an incredibly painful condition. So Franklin designed a flexible catheter to make it more manageable for him.
And the glass harmonica.
His favorite invention, he said. It was this beautiful musical instrument made of graduated glass bowls spinning on a spindle. You played it by touching the wet rims with your fingers. It made this haunting, ethereal sound. Mozart and Beethoven actually composed music for it.
Now, here's a question that always comes up. With the stove, the lightning rod, the bifocals, he could have been the richest man in the world if he patented them. He could have been the 18th century equivalent of a tech monopolist, but he didn't.
Never. Not a single patent. His philosophy on this was explicit and honestly quite moving. He wrote in his autobiography, and I'm paraphrasing here, "As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours, and this we should do freely and generously."
That is the original open source philosophy.
It really is. He believed that scientific knowledge belonged in the public domain for the betterment of all humanity, not for the profit of one individual.
So we have the businessman, the civic leader, the scientist, but now we have to pivot to the statesman, because for a very long time, Franklin was not a revolutionary. He wasn't plotting to overthrow the king. In fact, he was a proud Brit.
He was a staunch imperialist. People often forget this part. He spent nearly 2 decades, from 1757 to 1775, living in London.
He wasn't just visiting, he lived there.
He was an agent representing the interests of Pennsylvania and later other colonies. He loved London. He loved the coffee houses, the Royal Society, the whole intellectual scene.
He was the ultimate insider.
He was. He even managed to get his son, William, appointed as the royal governor of New Jersey. That is a high imperial honor. Franklin's vision was for the British Empire to be the greatest political structure in history, and he wanted the American colonies to be full, respected partners in that project.
So what changed? How do you go from being a royalist to a revolutionary?
It was a slow burn, and it was really fueled by the arrogance of the British Parliament. Franklin spent years trying to explain America to the British, and they just wouldn't listen. They saw the colonists as second-class citizens, as these rustic children who just needed to be disciplined.
The Stamp Act of 1765 was the first major crack in the relationship.
Right. And Franklin actually misread the situation at first and thought the colonies might accept it. But when he saw the firestorm of outrage back home, he pivoted. He testified before Parliament, and it was an absolute masterclass in persuasion.
What was his argument?
He argued that Americans would willingly pay duties to regulate trade across the empire, but they would never accept internal taxes, like the Stamp Act, without having representation in Parliament. He was instrumental in getting the act repealed.
But the tension just kept rising, and the real breaking point, the moment of no return, was the cockpit incident.
The cockpit. January 1774. This is the moment the cord was finally and irrevocably cut.
Can you set the scene for us? What happened?
So, Franklin had gotten his hands on some private letters written by Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts. And in these letters, Hutchinson was basically advising London to crack down hard on colonial liberties. Franklin leaked them to friends in Boston.
Why? What was his goal?
He thought he was saving the relationship. He figured, if I can just show them that it's this one bad governor giving bad advice, they won't blame the king or Parliament as a whole.
It blew up in his face.
Massively. The British government was furious. Franklin was summoned to the Privy Council chamber in London, a small amphitheater known as the Cockpit. And there, the Solicitor General, a man named Alexander Wedderburn, proceeded to verbally abuse Franklin for a solid hour in front of the entire British establishment.
And Franklin just stood there and took it.
He stood there, stone-faced, completely silent. Wedderburn called him a thief, a liar, a traitor, a man without honor. And the audience, all these lords and officials, they cheered and jeered. It was a public humiliation designed to utterly destroy him.
And he didn't say a single word.
Not one. But observers said that he remained absolutely motionless. In that silence, something in Franklin changed. He realized that this government would never respect him, and it would never respect America. He walked into that room a Brit. He walked out an American.
There's a story about the suit he was wearing that day.
Yes, a spotted Manchester velvet suit. He took it off that night, and he packed it away. He didn't wear it again for years, until the day in Paris when he signed the Treaty of Alliance with France. It was his subtle, long-game revenge.
But that decision to break with Britain came at a terrible, terrible personal cost. His son, William.
It is the great tragedy of his life. The political divide became a family chasm. William was the royal governor of New Jersey. He owed his allegiance and his job to the king. When the war came, William remained a loyalist.
And Franklin expected him to side with the colonies.
He did. He expected his son to stand with him to resign his post in protest. William refused.
So they ended up on opposite sides of the war.
Literally enemies. William was eventually arrested by the Patriots. They never truly reconciled. Franklin, the great compromiser in politics, could not compromise on this. When he sailed back to Philadelphia in 1775, he was leaving his son behind, emotionally and politically, forever.
So it comes back in 1775. The shooting has already started at Lexington and Concord. He's immediately elected to the Second Continental Congress. And now we get to 1776, the Committee of Five.
Congress appoints a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. It's Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Sherman, and Livingston. Jefferson, of course, does the actual writing. He was the better writer, and Franklin knew it. But Franklin made what he called small but important changes.
The most famous one is self-evident, isn't it?
It is. Jefferson had originally written, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." Franklin took his pen, scratched that out, and wrote, "self-evident."
We hold these truths to be self-evident. What's the real difference there, in your view?
It shifts the entire philosophical foundation of the argument. Sacred is a religious term. It implies that the authority for these rights comes from God or the church. Self-evident is a scientific term. It's an axiom, like in geometry.
Like 2 + 2 = 4.
Exactly. It requires no external proof. It is a rational fact of nature. It was a pure Enlightenment edit. It grounded American rights in reason, not just in theology.
So they signed the Declaration. They are all now officially traitors to the crown. If they lose this war, they all hang. And to win, they desperately need money and guns. The colonies have neither.
So Congress looks at Franklin, who is now 70 years old, suffering from gout, in constant pain, and they say, "You're going to France."
This mission to France is arguably Franklin's greatest single act of service to the country. He has to sail across the Atlantic in the middle of winter, dodging British warships the whole way. If he had been captured, he would have been taken to London and hanged.
He arrives in Paris, and he instantly becomes a sensation. But he does something very, very clever with his public image, doesn't he?
He was a master of branding even back then. He knew the French had this sort of romanticized idea of Americans as noble savages, rustic, virtuous, simple people living close to nature.
So he leaned right into it.
He did. He ditched the powdered wig and the sword that every other diplomat wore.
And he wore that fur cap.
He wore a simple marten fur cap. He wore plain brown clothes. He didn't wear his spectacles in public. He played the role of the New World philosopher to perfection, and the French went absolutely insane for him.
Like Beatles-level mania.
Exactly. He was a rock star. His face was on snuff boxes, rings, watches, little dolls. Women started doing their hair a la Franklin in a style that mimicked his fur cap. He was, without question, the most famous man in Paris.
But it wasn't just vanity. He was using that celebrity for a very specific purpose.
It was a tool. He used his access to the high society salons and the royal court to secure vital loans and shipments of arms. He was working on King Louis VI, an absolute monarch, trying to convince him to support a Republican revolution against his rival Britain. It was an incredible diplomatic tightrope act.
And the big payoff came in 1778.
The Treaty of Alliance. After the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga proved that the colonists could actually fight and win, Franklin was able to close the deal. France officially joined the war on the American side.
And let's be clear, Without that French money, and, crucially, the French Navy, does the American Revolution succeed?
No, it fails. Washington's army would have starved or been overrun eventually. The final decisive battle at Yorktown was won because the French fleet blocked the British escape by sea. Franklin's diplomacy was every bit as important as Washington's generalship.
And Franklin stays on after the war to negotiate the peace. The Treaty of Paris in 1783.
Which secured British recognition of American independence. He's the only man to sign the Declaration, the alliance with France, and the peace treaty with Britain. He basically birthed the nation on the world stage.
I love that quote from the French Foreign Minister Vergennes when Thomas Jefferson finally came to replace Franklin in Paris. Jefferson arrives, and Vergennes asks him, "It is you who replaced Dr. Franklin."
And Jefferson replies, "No one can replace him, sir. I am only his successor. It's just the ultimate compliment from one genius to another."
So he finally returns to Philadelphia in 1785. He's 79 years old. He's in a lot of pain. He has gout. He has bladder stones. The trip home was apparently agony. But he's still not done.
1787, the Constitutional Convention.
The country's falling apart. The Articles of Confederation just aren't working. So the states send delegates to Philadelphia to try and write a new constitution. Franklin is the oldest delegate there. He's 81. He is suffering so much physically he can't even walk to the State House.
How did he get there?
He was carried in a sedan chair. It was basically a chair on poles. And he hired 4 prisoners from the local jail to carry him because he said their gait was smoother than a carriage on the rough cobblestones.
That is just an incredible image. The founding sage of the country being carried by prisoners.
But his mind was as sharp as ever. His role at the convention wasn't to write the specific articles of the Constitution. It was to be the voice of calm, to keep the peace. The convention was hot, angry, and constantly deadlocked between the big states and the little states. Franklin was the one who urged compromise.
He gave a famous speech at the very end, didn't he?
He had James Wilson read it for him because he was too weak to stand for that long. He urged all the delegates to sign the document, despite its flaws. He said, "I consent, sir, to this Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best."
And he has that beautiful observation about the chair George Washington was sitting in throughout the convention.
The rising sun chair. The chair had a carving of a sun on the backrest, and Franklin said that he'd been looking at it all summer, wondering if the sun was a rising sun or a setting sun. He said painters often have trouble distinguishing the two. But at the end, when the Constitution was finally signed, he said, "Now I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun."
It's so poetic. But we have to address one more crucial part of his evolution, and it's a difficult one. It's the part that really complicates his legacy: slavery.
This is crucial. We can't whitewash this part of his life. For much of his career, Franklin was not an abolitionist. He was a part of the system.
He owned enslaved people himself.
He did. Records show names like Peter, Jemima, Othello, King, and George. And he advertised the sale of slaves in his newspaper. The Pennsylvania Gazette ran ads for slave auctions and for the return of runaways.
That's very hard to reconcile with the man who wrote so eloquently about liberty.
It is. But Franklin was a man of his time who, eventually, managed to rise above his time. His views shifted. It was a slow, gradual evolution. In 1763, he visited a school for black children, and he wrote afterwards that he saw no difference in their capacity for learning compared to white children. That really began to chip away at the racist ideology that was used to justify slavery.
And the revolution itself must have played a huge part.
Absolutely. I mean, how can you argue for your own freedom from British slavery while you are holding other human beings in actual chains? The hypocrisy just became too glaring for him to ignore. By the end of his life, he wasn't just quiet about it. He was vocal.
In 1787, he took on a formal role.
He became the president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery. And his very last public act, literally the last thing he did before he died, was to sign a petition to the new U.S. Congress in February of 1790.
What did the petition ask for?
It called for the complete abolition of slavery and an immediate end to the slave trade. He argued that Congress had a duty to restore to liberty those unhappy men who were held in bondage. Just weeks before his death, he wrote a biting satirical essay mocking the pro-slavery arguments being made in Congress. He was fighting until the very end.
It's a powerful final chapter to his life. He dies shortly after that, on April 17th, 1790.
He was 84 years old. He died of complications from pleurisy. And the funeral, something like 20,000 people showed up.
And for context, the entire population of Philadelphia at the time was only about 28,000.
Right, so basically the entire city came to a standstill. The ships in the harbor lowered their flags. He was buried at Christ Church Burial Ground. And his tombstone, it's really striking.
He had written a famous mock epitaph for himself when he was young, right? Comparing his body to the cover of an old book, its contents torn out, hoping to appear again in a new and more perfect edition.
He did, but that's not what's on the grave. The actual stone is incredibly simple. It doesn't list any of his titles. It doesn't say signer of the Declaration or a great scientist or ambassador. It just reads Benjamin and Deborah Franklin.
So let's try to unpack all of this. What does it all mean for us? Why do we call him the first American?
I think it's because he really embodies both the best and the most complicated parts of the American ethos. He was a striver. He started with nothing, a runaway kid with bread rolls under his arm, and he built a fortune and a global reputation.
He was a civic-minded citizen who believed in the public good, who believed we could fix society's problems if we just got organized and were clever about it.
He was the guy who thought, if there's a problem, let's invent a solution. He was a scientist who believed in reason and evidence above all. But he was also a man of deep contradictions, a runaway who dined with kings, a slave owner who became a leading abolitionist, a man who sought wealth but gave his most valuable inventions away for free.
He practically invented the idea of the self-made man.
He did, and his legacy is so tangible. I mean, you can walk into a public library today because of Franklin. You can call the fire department because of Franklin. If you wear glasses, there's a good chance you're wearing his invention. The very structure of our government, the great compromise between the House and Senate, has his fingerprints all over it.
So here's a provocative thought to leave you with. Franklin was obsessed with self-improvement. He had his famous list of 13 virtues that he tried to live by: temperance, silence, order, resolution, and so on. He was constantly trying to hack his own life to be more productive. If Benjamin Franklin were alive today, with the internet and all of modern technology at his fingertips, what would he be?
That is a fascinating question. Would he be a tech mogul, like an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates, trying to engineer the future? Or would he be a diplomat trying to solve climate change?
Or maybe, just maybe, he'd be a blogger, using wit and memes to challenge the status quo, just like Silence Dogood did 300 years ago.
I like to think he'd be all of the above. And he'd probably be trying to figure out how to harness fusion energy while tweeting about it from his phone.
If you enjoyed exploring the life of this incredible founding father with us, please like this video and subscribe to the channel History Titans. And we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of Franklin's many inventions do you think had the biggest impact on the modern world? Was it something physical, like the lysing rod? Or was it the diplomacy that saved the revolution?
See you in the next deep dive.
Thanks for listening.